All right, Kyle, what's your deep dive?
My deep dive is these offensive coordinators that are obviously amazing and beautifully designed playbooks. And, Jared Goff throwing for 5 touchdowns a game, 18 for 18, Jared Goff shredding the defense. That stuff doesn't happen without a great offensive coordinator.
Yep.
The question and the part of the deep dive that I want to talk about is offensive coordinator to head coach and the pipeline that's available right now, who we think will have the best career as a head coach moving forward. There's a number of names here that are at the top of my mind, Liam Coen,
Correct.
Ben Johnson, all these guys that are potential Chicago Bears head coaches. We've got a quarterback there that needs development.
Projecting right now.
I am a little bit, but it's my deep dive. And I'm going to take it situation by situation. Okay. And I'll start with a guy like Joe Brady, who has been fabulous. And, it's a chicken and the egg conversation in all of these situations. Can you replicate Josh Allen? Do you have leaders in the room like they do in Buffalo in terms of the coaching staff? You think about Detroit. Dan Campbell is like a perennial coach of the year candidate now, and he's got a fabulous culture. But Aaron Glenn's the defensive coordinator. Yep. Everybody loves Aaron Glenn, the way they play defense, the way they can scheme up blitzes, the effort that they play with, the things that they've had to overcome from a health standpoint. Ben Johnson on the offensive side of the ball. You have a world-class offensive line. You've got 2, now 1 running backs. You've got some receivers. You've got a dominant tight end. You've got a quarterback who's cerebral enough and understands not only the what, but the why. My question is, when they transition from offensive coordinator to head coach, or Liam Coen, for example, Baker Mayfield, offensive line studs. You've got Mike Evans. You've got a number of backs that can catch and run the football that are playing above their slot in the draft or whatever it is you want to value these guys at. My question is, when they become from offensive coordinator to head coach, does it diminish their product as the offensive genius that they are with everything that's on their plate? Like, if Ben Johnson becomes the head coach, is he still Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator that we've loved so far? And I liken it to this. Kate and I took a trip to a town in California called Halesburg. I can't spell it, but it's somewhere near Sonoma Valley, Sonoma Coast, Napa Valley. Correct. It's one of those like wine and cheese type joints. There is a Michelin star restaurant there called Single Thread. Best meal I've ever had. It was one of those small plate for 100 small plates until you can't eat anymore. And everything that comes out there, you've never seen before. You've never smelled anything like it, tasted anything like it. The flavor profiles are so advanced. It's a lot like watching this Lions offense. You know what I'm saying? But my question, and we never met the chef.
Really?
They talked about the chef. Every server that came over talked about the chef a million times.
That's weird. Michelin star. He usually always comes.
But hear me out. If the chef's job was to cook, design, plate, all this stuff, and go out there and talk about his stuff and have all this other stuff on his plate, if he had to greet guests at the front door and seat them and figure out who's got to work tonight and scheduling, does that diminish his product? Is it less of a Michelin star restaurant? And that's what my concerns are with these offensive geniuses. And I know we've seen it before, guys transitioning from OC to head coach. Your boy in Green Bay is fantastic. There's a number of these guys out there. Sean McVay is probably the top of the list. Is this crop similar to the names that I just named? And what are your concerns with an offensive coordinator becoming a head coach?
When I liken it to this, that crop that you're talking about all came from the Shanahan.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have to put that to the side. When you talk about a Kyle Shanahan, a Mike McDaniel, you talk about a Matt LaFleur, like those all came from the Shanahan tree. You can even throw Raheem Morris technically in there as well. So like that was just a special staff of individuals that were able to work under one of the greatest coaches that we've seen, right? Now, your question about Ben Johnson, because he's had an opportunity the last couple years to take jobs, and people wondered, is it because his setup is so perfect in Detroit is the reason he hasn't taken the job? Because it would essentially be like him starting over in regards to implementing his offense and then not having the subsequent players that he has with Detroit. When you talk about the offensive line,
you can't bring that with you.
Yeah, you talk about the two-headed monster in the backfield. When you talk about having the sun god at receiver, like if you're going somewhere, it's because that team probably isn't good, right? And it doesn't mean they don't have talent, but they're not going to have the talent that Detroit has. So, like, that's always a question. I liken it also to this, like when interim coordinators or defensive coordinators, offensive coordinators get jobs, you always kind of see a regression on their side of the ball. Case in point, Jeff Ulbrich.
Yep.
That was a top 5 defense when he was just a D coordinator. And it's hard to make that transition, especially in season. Now, in the off season, right, you get the OTAs, you get training camp, you get preseason games. So that helps you kind of work through some of those.
Figure out
what like
delegation.
Correct. As far as delegating, as far as if I'm still going to call the plays, who do I trust enough in regards to the special teams? Can I keep my hands off of that? Do I need to be all involved in that? On the offense, like I trust my coordinators, but how involved do I need to be? And I'll be honest, like I was with Kyle Shanahan his first year in San Fran. Kyle Shanahan delegates the defense to the defensive coordinators.
Yep.
He doesn't do anything over there. Like he has, and again, people can look at that as a good thing or a bad thing.
Visibility, but he's not putting his finger.
Exactly. When you see him, when the defense is up, what is he over there doing? iPad.
Yep.
Going over stuff. And I think for defensive coordinators, they don't get that same type of love, or people attack them more when the offense isn't doing well, because people will say, you're a head coach, but how many head coaches do we see that are play callers still, like literally delegate the defense to the defensive coordinators and trust them?
Yeah.
Like it happens all the time. So it's like, it's not created equal. But getting back to your point, Liam Coen, I think, would be fine, right? Because when you talk about them having a good young offensive line, you talk about Mike Evans, who missed the majority of the season, right? Chris Godwin has missed the majority of the season. He's been able to pivot and figure out his personnel group. He knows he has 3 good running backs. So I'm going to put 2 backs out there at one time and be able to use the personnel I have. So right there, that lets me know he can adjust on the fly.
Yeah.
He can adjust, which, again, I think the biggest question we also have to ask is, just because you're a good coordinator doesn't mean you're going to be a good head coach, because you have to be a leader of men.
Bro.
So like that's the first and foremost thing.
Mark Trestman was the guy who drafted me in Chicago. And if you sat in a team meeting with Mark Trestman and he was leading the meeting, you would say, what the hell are we doing?
Yeah.
But then the team meeting ends, you go to the offensive room and you're like,
genius.
That's why we hired him. And every week you're putting up 35 points and you're like, okay, so I have seen these coordinators become head coaches, but stay coordinators. And to your point, they allow the defensive side of the ball to handle their business. We had a historically bad defense in the years Mark Trestman was there. He got fired as a result of team production because he was the head coach.
Yeah.
But our offense was never the issue. Go on. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
That's what I'm talking about.
But yeah, exactly. So like that's the thing you have to ask yourself. Just because a guy is a genius X's and O's wise doesn't mean he can lead 53 men. Right, essentially, because all those guys have to trust in what you're saying and what you're preaching, right, to be able to follow what you're saying and believe it, right? So just because you're good in the X's and O's, but that's why I think Liam Coen will be good, just because he's been able to adjust. And people question that when Dave Canellis left, what Baker Mayfield are we going to see? And we're seeing another Pro Bowl type Baker Mayfield. And that proves that Liam Coen is again.
Or that Baker is just him.
It could be that too. But I liken it too that he was under the McVay tree as well.
Yep.
Right. Liam Coen was in with the Rams, but he was a Kentucky offensive coordinator, but he spent time with Sean McVay as well. So I think also the tree you come from under actually can benefit or hurt you when it comes to realizing, is this guy a good head coach or is he just a coordinator only?
I think I've thought about this kind of dichotomy a lot between offense and defense. I think it starts at the fact that offense and defense are fundamentally different, in that offense like dictates terms. And so for the defense perspective, something I've said a lot, that there's no magic defense. You just have to be able to have answers for everything. Like there's cover 3, cover 4, this coverage versus that. It's like, there's
Brian Flores might beg to differ.
No, but it's like, it's getting everyone on the same page. That's what's the fundamental problem of defensive football, is being able to get everyone on the same page. So it's fundamentally coaching. It is being able to get 11 guys to act as one. That is what matters the most for a defensive coordinator, is that ability. And then obviously, like, being able to then teach why and what they're doing helps a ton as well. But it's like, that is the difference. Whereas on the offense side of the ball, there kind of are magic plays. There are plays that work a lot better than others. Yes, getting guys on the same page helps, but knowing that, like, if I motion from here, motion a guy to a trip set, and they usually react with this, that I get this coverage, and then I get a one-on-one with Jamar Chase. It's like, knowing that stuff, knowing the X's and O's to a deep, deep degree, and being able to be creative in that realm can make you a really, really successful offense coordinator without needing to communicate why it works. You just tell them to do it. The quarterback might need to know a little bit why, but still, sees an open guy, he hits them. So they don't need to necessarily have that command over the locker room. They need to have the creative ingenuity of being able to create new plays to beat rules of a defense. And so it's a fundamentally different task at hand. And that's why you get fundamentally different people, I think, attracted to both sides of the ball. Whereas defense side of the ball, there's kind of like that meme of, I don't know if you guys have seen it, where it's like one's Albert Einstein is the defensive coordinator. And
the black and white photo type thing.
Yeah. And then the offense coordinator is Ken from the Barbie movie.
Yeah.
That's like Cliff Kingsbury. It's like, that's how you get, because you have to have seen a lot of the game to call defense and know a lot of just like how men and you have operate and have that ability to command and the respect to lead a defensive side. Whereas on the offensive side, you just need to have that creativity. That works.
Vic Fangio, Matt Nagy, 2018.
So why on the offensive side, a lot of times there's a number of times, and you saw with Mark Trestman, when an offensive guy gets promoted, he never necessarily had to be a coach. He never had to lead men. And I think you're kind of seeing that a little bit with Mike McDaniel in Miami as well, that like when things go hard, it's like he doesn't really have answers because he just has the X's and O's to lean back on. He doesn't have necessarily the coaching pedigree to lean back on. So when you're looking for a head coach, it's no OC versus DC in my mind. Like, which one do you want? You want the guy who can command. Like, you want the guy who can implement 53 guys, get them all on the same page consistently, not have too high highs, not have too low lows, just keep you consistent. But if you have an OC that can do that, both, because OCs usually trend towards obviously the more like cerebral, being creative, having new play calls. That's the ideal, right? The Andy Reid, the Kyle Shanahan, the Sean McVay, those guys, year in and year out, if you can consistently be ahead of the curve on the offside side of the ball and have that at the head coaching position, that's the dream. In my opinion, those are the guys that, but obviously then we saw Belichick did that on the defense side of the football, be consistently ahead of the curve on that. Some guys can, it's just more difficult to on that side.
Feels like these offensive coaches are like DJs and they have to make brand new sets. And the defense is just the group of people in front of the DJ that's figuring out how to dance to each of these songs. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's more of a reactionary method.
Yes.
And the offensive side of the ball is like, we have to be creative. We have to be innovative. And some of these guys just wake up in the morning and they just piss innovation. That's who I want to get for my next head coach. If I had to put a gun to your head and say, because who's going to be the best one out of this bunch in the head coaching realm? Because
innovation on the football field is not limited to just the offensive side of the ball. Like to scheme good offense, you have to know the defense like inside.
Correct.
Too. You have to know the entire game,
why,
how it all
the
works.
why of it.
What was the question?
Who's going to be the best head coach out of these OCs?
So that's the thing. That's like the worry about Ben Johnson. Is that he's like actively rejected that role. And
as I'm saying, so like why? If you're not willing to take on the challenge a couple of years ago, what's going to change this year, right? It's again, we talked about it earlier. Is it because you know you're not going to have the talent that you have in Detroit? Again, he is a mad scientist genius when it comes to diagraphing plays and being very creative on the offensive side of the ball. But, you know, there was rumors he could have potentially went to Jacksonville a few years ago, a couple other spots. It's like, why didn't you do that? Because we've learned in the NFL, things can turn quickly on you. You may not get another opportunity. Byron Leftwich was a guy that was a hot name.
Yep.
Decided not to take the job in Jacksonville, and now look at him now. He's not going to get an opportunity to be a head coach most likely. So it's just interesting when you look at Ben Johnson. But to answer your question, and again, this is not me being biased because I'm a defensive guy. I think Brian Flores and Aaron Glenn, to me, when you talk about like leaders of men, and I know Mike says there's not like a slew of guys that are head coaches that actually still call defense of plays. With those two guys would probably be those type of guys that would still do it. We see D'Amico Ryans having a lot of success with it. And it's crazy because last year Houston kind of leaned on their offense, but this year it's definitely leaning on its defense. And D'Amico Ryans has still been able to have that defense play at a high level this year while being the head coach and still calling plays. But when you look at Aaron Glenn, an ex-player who's been in the locker room, who knows what it takes to play at the highest level, former Pro Bowl guy at cornerback, what he's been able to do, to your point, with that defense this year before the slew of injuries happened, is have them as a top 5 defense, right? And even when guys were getting dinged up here and there, he still had them playing adequate football. Now, it's tough to overcome when, like, literally you've been dinged at every level on defense. You talk about Carlton Davis, Aleem McNeil, Aiden Hutchinson, Anzalone, Rodriguez. Like, those are 5 starters. Those aren't just guys.
Dudes.
And those are dudes. And yet, like, he's been able to keep it afloat. Now, it all kind of came crashing down last week, but then Josh Allen and the offense had a lot to do with that as well. So I think Aaron Glenn and then Brian Flores, we know, with the suit with the NFL and, him and Tua's relationship.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a lot there. But when you hear the Minnesota Viking players talk about him,
they seem to love him.
They love him.
They went to the podium with him. Like,
you know what I'm saying? It was Harrison Phillips, I believe.
They were like, this is our guy right here.
Yeah, and I think Brian Flores has learned a lot. The thing is, when you come from that Belichick tree, it's almost like, I don't know what it is. It's like a disease where the guys under Belichick try to like outdo him in regards to the way that he coached. And I think Brian Flores learned a lot from that experience in Miami. And you can just tell by how humbling he was talking about the situation with Tua. And then to your point, the players having his back at Minnesota says a lot about how he's grown in regards to coaching. So I think he would be an amazing coach as well. And then I talked about, I think Liam Cohen, like I love Ben Johnson, but to Mike's point, a little nervous that you turned down a job like 2 years in a row.
Well, he's waiting for Cincinnati, ain't he?
I mean, is it that? Is he waiting?
Can you imagine?
Supposedly he likes Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence too. That's a rumor.
Well, I promise you, if he likes Trevor Lawrence, he's gonna love Joe Burrow.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Again, me and Mike have talked about this before. I don't think Zach Taylor's going anywhere because he's the offensive-minded coach, and that's not the side of the ball that's bad.
Yeah.
Which I get. I hate how the goalpost gets moved in that regards, but that's another conversation.
Offensive coach is supposed
100%.
And I agree with you there.
Yeah, 100%.
That's an offensive league, Jay.
I get that, but yet you have a prolific offense, and yet you're not in the playoff race right now because of your defense.
Like the most prolific offense.
Yeah, literally. So
I do feel like NFL owners are horrible at evaluating how people perform versus expectations.
Yeah.
Like, especially like their side of the football. It's like when you have, and that's why they keep hiring every OC that coached Aaron Rodgers, every OC that coached Patrick Mahomes. It's like,
good luck.
They were going to be good. Like, what did they do above expectations?
Like those guys are dudes. They were going to have success regardless. Like,
so, but then pass on guys who are objectively, I mean, you just look at what Brian Flores is working with in Minnesota. You look at that defense before the season. What would you have pegged them as?
Middle
average?
Of the road.
Yeah. I was not even probably like a little bit below average.
Exactly.
And even what he did last year with less than what he has this year. So it's like, we talk about getting the max out of the talent that's on the roster and leading those guys. And what I love about him is he knows what everybody's skill set is. He kind of reminds me of Rex a lot in regards to how he coaches defense. He knows everybody has a skill set, and he's going to put you in position so your skill set can flourish.
Yeah.
He's not going to tell you to do something he knows you can't do well.
Yeah.
And that's what I really love about what I've seen from that Minnesota Vikings defense.
Well, and it's just good to go back to when he was with Miami too. I mean, they had a great defense this final year with objectively not great talent.
Yeah, it was like, I mean, Ogba, who was a really good pro, and then Shaq Lawson, both of those guys like leading them in sacks.
That's like your D-line. Those guys go anywhere else, and you're begging for more defensive line help. That was just not the most talented unit, and you got the most out of them.